Hello friends, in the last lecture we have got idea about the randomness and most important unit we have studied, that is measures of central tendency. But friends, another unit from your paper 5th Biostatistics is very important, that is the measures of a dispersion. My friends, when we will understand actually the title of the unit, then it will be very easy to understand the content of the unit. Here we can get at a measures means we have to measure, we have to count, we have to means all sort of the things are there. And dispersion, then what is dispersion? That is the variation, isn't it? And that variations among the atoms of the population that we want to measure. What is that? And with the help of that dispersion, we will be able to get the idea about total population, isn't it? Now, here, according to Konar is the name of science, dispersion is a measure of the extent to which the individual atom vary. Keep in mind, one example I will put forth you just to understand about the dispersion is that. Suppose America and India, two countries are there. In case of development, we have to talk about the two countries. Then we will come to know that America is having 100 marks in case of development. 100 marks in development. But our country 80% developed. Means under development, our country is there. So 20% dispersion is there. 20% America are ahead of us in case of development. So that is how much dispersion is there? 20%. Suppose take into consideration Kenya, the country which is not that much developed. So having marks 60, so that country is 40% away from the America. So that is the dispersion away from that one. We are 20%. So that is a dispersion measure of a, we have to say that little bit variation into that one. Greater the variation amongst the different atoms of the series, the more will be the dispersion. Dispersion is a more and higher, greater. Suppose greater dispersion is there. Definitely Kenya is not having that much developed, a greater dispersion as compared to the other countries, isn't it? So that is the measurement. Now as per the Pauli, dispersion is the measure of variations of the atom. जे पॉप्युलेशन मध्ये ॲटम्स आहेत त्या ॲटम्समध्ये किती व्हेरिएशन आहे ते मेजर करणं, दॅट इज नथिंग बट द मेजर्स ऑफ डिस्पर्जन, दॅट इज अकॉर्डिंग टू द बाउली. नाउ व्हाट आर द ऑब्जेक्टिव्स? What are the objectives of measuring of a dispersion? To determine the reliability of an average. Reliability of an average. Suppose already I have given you lot of examples. You will have to some write or understand with the help of your own examples. Keep in mind variation. Suppose in our class only one student have got the 98% marks and other all students are below, we have to say that the 70% marks, isn't it? And suppose we have calculated the average of such a 10 students, then what happens actually? Reliability, average, no doubt. Actually that average, whatever we have calculated of percentage of marks of 10 students qualified from the 10th standard, the student who has secured a more marks, above 90 marks, will not get the justice because of that average. Isn't it? Average percentage of marks that is achieved by the 10th standard of any class. So we have to say that dispersion is suppose measured, then there it is easy to determine the reliability of an average. To compare the variability of two or more series, that is possible because of measuring of a dispersion. For facilitating the use of other statistical measures. So that actually once we have calculated the dispersion of the population, dispersion of atom, then that could be again taken that readings, that data for further analysis. That facility can be provided by the measuring of a dispersion. Basis of a statistical quality control, keep in mind. Actually measuring of a dispersion is a basis of a statistical quality control. Now, what are the properties of a good measures of dispersion? What are the properties? Easy to understand. When we calculate when we measure the dispersion, at that time, that could be the easy to understand, simple to calculate. Again, simple to calculate is there. Again, rigidly defined, perfectly defined, based on all observations. That is also most important property of a measures of dispersion. Not affected by the extreme observations. काही एक्स्ट्रीम्स ऑब्झर्वेशन्स असतील तर त्याच्यामुळं येणाऱ्या मेजरमेंट्स मेजर्स ऑफ डिस्पर्जनवरती परिणाम होत नाही. Capable of further algebraic treatment. The whatever result we have got, that can be further analyzed for further conclusions. So again, I will tell you the properties of a good measures of dispersion. Easy to understand, simple to calculate, rigidly defined, based on all observations, not affected by the extreme observations, and capable of further algebraic analysis or treatment. Now, types of measures of dispersion. Types of measures of dispersion. Which are those? Algebraic one, graphical. Algebraic one, absolute range. Graphical, quartile, mean deviation, standard deviations, and relative one. So these are the way how to say that. Algebraic and graphical representations. Now, coefficient of range, coefficient of variation, coefficient of quartile deviation, coefficient of mean deviation. So these all are the types of the measures of dispersions are there. Now, algebraic measures of dispersion. Algebraic measures of dispersion. Mathematical way to calculate the measures of dispersion, that is standard deviation, coefficient of variance by using the number and formulas. So these are the algebraic. What are the characteristics of that? Mathematical way, algebraic variables are used and numerical figures used. Formula and equations are used into that one. Now, graphical measures of dispersion. Calculate the measures of dispersion by the figures and graphs. That is calculation of dispersion among the heights of the students of the class from the average height of using graph is there. Then algebraic variables are used, numerical figures are used, the formula and equations are used. In graphical measures of dispersion, characteristics of a graphical measures, of dispersion. Visual way of measuring dispersion, use of graphs and figures help us to have an idea about the dispersion, particularly at a glance. Immediately we could understand about the dispersion. Absolute measures of dispersion. Absolute measures of dispersion are there. It gives an idea about the amount of dispersion in the set of observation. Amount of dispersion. These quantities measures the dispersion in the same units as the units of original data. Absolute measures cannot be used to compare the variations of a two or more series or data. Set absolute measures dispersion, a range, mean, standard deviations are there. Now, relative measures of dispersion. Measures are sort of ratio and are called coefficients. Measures are sort of ratio and called coefficients. Each absolute measures of dispersion can be converted into its relative measures. Each absolute measure of dispersion can be converted into its relative measures. It can be used to compare the two or more sets. So you have to keep in mind relative measures of dispersion can be used to compare two or more sets. Now here today we have to get idea about again the range. in case of range. What is the difference between the maximum and minimum observations in the data set is called as a range. R is equal to high value minus low value. Simple and easy method to understand. It gives a quick answer. But what are the demerits? Gives a rough answer and not a based on the all observations. Changes from one sample to the next in the population cannot be calculated in open and ended distribution. Affected by a sample situations. That are the demerits. My friends, with this or before completing this today's lecture, you have to keep in mind our ex-President of India, Honorable Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam used to say that एखाद्याचा पराभव करणं फार सोपं असतं, मात्र एखाद्याला जिंकून देणं खूपच अवघड असतं. Keep in mind. Again, in the last lecture also I have given you idea about the two players of the Olympic. ऑलिम्पिकच्या 2 प्लेयरची तुम्हाला माहिती सांगितली. इन केस ऑफ द रनर, पहिला रनर होता तो त्याची लाईन क्रॉस करायच्या आधीच थांबला. त्याच्या पाठीमागे येणारा सेकंड जो रनर होता, ही कुड बी एबल टू ॲक्च्युली win the gold medal in that running, but he decided not to do such a things. त्याच्या पुढं जो प्लेयर होता त्याला सांगितलं क्रॉस व्हायची लाईन, फायनल लाईन पुढं आहे अजून, बाळा तू पळ आणि मी तुझ्या पाठीमागून येतो. सो त्या व्यक्तीनं दुसऱ्याला जिंकून दिलं, हरवून नाही दिलं. त्यानं सेकंड पोझिशन घेतली. हे आपण आत्ता झालेल्या जपानमधल्या टोकियोमधल्या ऑलिम्पिकमध्ये पाहिलं. हे पाहिलं, पण हा विचार जो मांडला तो अनेक वर्षापूर्वी आपल्या देशाचे आदरणीय राष्ट्रपती डॉक्टर APJ अब्दुल कलाम एक सायंटिस्ट होते, मनानं स्वभावानं शास्त्रज्ञ होते, विज्ञान जाणणार होते. त्यांनी एकच म्हणजे आपल्या जगाला त्यावेळेला सांगितलं, एखाद्याचा पराभव करणं फार सोपं असतं, मात्र एखाद्याला जिंकून देणं फार खूपच अवघड असतं. मी या नोटवरती असं सांगेन की मला माहिती आहे की आमचे विद्यार्थी इतरांना जिंकून देण्यामध्ये फार मोठं योगदान देतील. त्याचा पराभव करण्यासाठी ते झटणार नाहीत. याच्यासाठी एक उदाहरणसुद्धा आपल्याकडं बऱ्याचदा सांगितलं जातं किंवा व्हॉट्सॲपवरती येतं आहे की एका कंपनीनं सगळ्या कामगारांना बोलवलं आणि त्या कामगारांना पुरस्कार द्यायचा होता. पण तत्पूर्वी एक छोटासा खेळ घेण्यात आला. त्या प्रत्येक 25 कामगाराच्या हातामध्ये एक एक फुगा दिला, फुगवलेला फुगा दिला आणि त्यांनी सांगितले की स्पर्धा घेतली जाईल आणि जो पहिला येईल त्याला आम्ही पुरस्कार देणार आहे. मग फुगा दिला, फुगवलेला, एक एक पिन दिली प्रत्येकाच्या हातामध्ये. त्या 25 जणांनी एका रूममध्ये सोडलं, तर त्याने फुगे इतरांचे फोडायला सुरुवात. ज्याच्या हातात फुगा एक अर्ध्या तासानंतर राहील तो जिंकेल असं सांगितलं गेलं. स्पर्धा सुरू झाली आणि पाहता पाहता सगळ्यांनी फुगे फोडले. एक जणानं वाचवण्याचा प्रयत्न केला, त्याचासुद्धा बाकीच्याने येऊन फोडला आणि ती स्पर्धा कोणीही जिंकू शकलं नाही. मनात आणलं असतं तर त्या 25 जणांनी ती स्पर्धा जिंकली असती. तर मित्रांनो, आपल्याला सगळ्यांना पुढं घेऊन जायचं आहे, सगळ्यांना स्पर्धा जिंकायची आहे आणि त्याच्यासाठी आपण हा विचार APJ कलामांचा मी सांगितलेलं उदाहरण लक्षात ठेवा आणि आपल्या आयुष्याच्या वाटचाल जी आहे ती आनंदमय चालू ठेवा. याच नोटवरती आजचं हे लेक्चर आपण थांबवतो आहे. जय हिंद, जय महाराष्ट्र अँड थँक्यू व्हेरी मच टू एव्हरीबडी.